For this particular roundtable, we're going to be discussing, does restorative justice offer a framework for America? State and local community leaders join us in discussing the path forward to address the potential for race and reconciliation. The Honorable Judge Calvin Johnson, nationally recognized leader in criminal justice reform, will be joining us. Chief Murphy Paul, Chief of the Baton Rouge Police Department, Representative Royce Duplessis, member of the Louisiana House of Representatives representing the 93rd District, Mayor Sharon Weston Broome, Mayor President of the City of Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish, Nzhada Harris, Student Bar Association President of the Southern University Law Center, and please feel free to correct me if I did not say your name correctly, and then Shailly Agnihotri, founder of the Restorative Center. Thank y'all for joining us.
Thank you, Angel. We're going to go in the formation that we just saw on the chart, which is a circular pattern. If you don't remember it, we can just put it up if you need to write down who's before you, who's after you. So we're running this roundtable as if it was a restorative justice circle. And so when it's your turn, you speak, and when you're done, you just pass to the person next to you in the clockwise direction. And of course, everybody has an opportunity to pass if you don't want to say anything. And I'm going to begin the circle by a quote from a Buddhist monk. Do not force others, including children, by any means whatsoever to adopt your views, whether by authority, threat, money, propaganda, or even education. However, through compassionate dialogue, help others renounce fanaticism and narrowness. To me, that might be what restorative justice means. So these days, I've been thinking about the legacy of Nelson Mandela and how he took a torn country and at that moment in time seized an opportunity to revive the potential of restorative justice. And his autobiography is something that we use a lot in our work with young people, especially just opening up and randomly reading a quote, which seems to always resonate because it's such a beautiful book. So I'm wondering who you have been reflecting upon to do this work in this moment of time. And the representative is not with me, so I'm going to pass it to Judge Johnson.
Well, good afternoon. And I'm just so happy to be with you. I have listened to several of the other presentations today, and I have been so moved actually by those presentations. There's been so much shared that is just makes me happy, to be honest with you, as I approach my 75th year. Makes me very happy to be just in this. And so I guess I'll start with, firstly, I'm just so happy to be seen. Just recognize, I don't want to be viewed, I'm happy to be seen. But in terms of who I look back at, I start with my mom and my dad. My mother gave me compassion and empathy, and my dad gave me courage. And so my father was first generation removed from slavery in my family, was my father. So I traced my heritage in Louisiana from beginning with my grandfather born on a plantation, through my father, and now to me. I have right next to me is a gun my father used as a 44 caliber rifle that belonged to my grandfather. And my father took that gun in 1963 and went to the sheriff's office and said to the sheriff, this is during the civil rights demonstrations in Baton Rouge and Plaquemine, went to the sheriff's office and told the sheriff, give me my son. The sheriff went in the jail and got my brother, and my brother refused to leave the jail unless the other demonstrators would also be free. But that's the most man, in terms of a trueness, in terms of courage, in terms of bravery, and in terms of a person who constantly speaks to me as regards little boy, and I didn't think my dad knew clearly my name, but who still speaks to me in terms of, this is what you got to do. This is a part of your responsibility, which is to say, to simply say, to make life better for others. That's a part of your responsibility. My father said those words to me in 91, the first year I was elected to a judge, and he was 89 years old. He said it to me in my courtroom. He said it to me in my chambers when he was disappointed with what I was doing. And so that's who is in this room with me right now. And I'll pass it to Mayor Broome.
Thank you. Judge, thank you for that time of reflection. And I will tell you, Ms. Agnihotri certainly shared a lot. So I was trying to reflect exactly on, is our focus restorative, in this first question, restorative justice, or is it, do you mind kind of repeating that question for me? Because I was a little, I just want to make sure I'm on track with when I respond.
We're just, so a lot of times in restorative justice circles, the first round, we sort of invoke wisdom from ancestors or elders.
Okay.
Or think of a quote or a prayer just to sort of create a space of humility for the conversation.
Okay.
So I began with a quote from a Buddhist priest, and then I referenced Mr. Mandela as somebody who inspired me in this work. And so I was just asking who you think about when you do the work you do, who inspires you, an elder. Yeah.
And thank you, Judge Johnson, for setting the tone. So let me tell you, so many people I think about as my elders, but I think a lot as I do the work that I do, about a fourth grade teacher that taught at my elementary school, who invited my third grade class, Mrs. Dozier. The fourth grade teacher invited Mrs. Dozier's class, which I was in, to come next door to her class. And as we sat in her class, she started unfolding a story to us about a young man who was from Chicago, which is where I was born and raised, who went to Mississippi to visit his family, relatives there, and was brutally murdered. And she was very, specific in unfolding the story to us. And she culminated the story by saying that it was Emmett Till, and by informing us that she was Emmett Till's mother. So Emmett Till's mother was Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley, who taught at my elementary school, Carter Elementary School in Chicago, Illinois. And she unfolded firsthand to me and my classmates as third graders the horrific tragedy around her son, Emmett Till. Well, certainly as a baby boomer and someone who came up, grew up during the 60s, the more I went on in life, the more vivid and more conversations around Emmett Till began to evolve. But certainly hearing that story from his mother firsthand has stuck with me all of my life since I was a third grader. And as a leader, I certainly think about that. I think about her because she even demonstrated courage and boldness and wanting to make sure that people saw what happened to her son. But she went on to, be an advocate for justice because of this grave injustice that had been done against her son and her family. So that is part of the fabric of my life. And when I think, when I lead, I think about instances and moments like that have occurred in my life. And that was certainly one of a highlight moment.
From you, Mayor, we go to Ms. Harris in the circle pattern. Yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone. My name is Najeda Harris. I know there's a question earlier about the pronunciation, but something I think about in this work is my great-grandmother. I'm very fortunate to have her. I was named after her. She nurtured me, and she's someone that definitely pours into me and provides mentorship and guidance. As one of many cousins, I'm an older cousin, and something she always reminds me of is to lead by example. And I think I take that into different areas of my life, especially when it comes to restorative justice work. So oftentimes in these positions as community leaders, policymakers, organizers, attorneys, future attorneys, we have to be very intentional about leading by example with the work that we're doing and viewing individuals as human beings, not just as people that have committed crimes or have done something wrong, but as actual individuals that are in circumstances where they might not have been able to avoid the circumstance they were in. They might not have been able to avoid the community that they were in at the time. They might have been an accessory. So just making sure that we lead by example in our tone, in our language, and how we treat other people. That's something that guides me in doing this work. A lot of time, especially in academia, we get so educated and we get so caught up in the nuances and the statistics that we forget that we're dealing with real human beings and human lives. Thank you.
So after Ms. Harris, when you're done, you can just pass
it off to Chief Paul.
Thank you.
The opportunity to
Coming in and out, can you unmute yourself again?
now.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, thank you for taking me through that journey through your lives. These days when I reflect, one of the things that I reflect on even more lately is when I see all the toxic behavior and the trauma that's in communities. People seem angry, and social media has made the world so small. And I'm often reminded on the words of my mother when she told me, never let anyone steal your joy. And, even as a young kid, when I look at the foundation that my mother set for me, when things that she told me when I was a little kid, some of the things that Ms. Harris talked about, respect for others, how to treat people, I'm reminded of how that shaped me. I remember she used to say, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And she used to always tell me that and tell me how beautiful I was and how I can achieve anything. And, law enforcement as a chief of police, where, we see crime, I'm often, reminded on how difficult times are, or second guess myself in decisions I make. I always go back the adversity along the way, but it's how you respond to the adversity that's more important than the hardship itself. So those are the things that I've been reflecting on lately in this current environment that we're in.
So when you're done, Chief, you can just send it back to me. So we're using this virtual talking piece. If we were sitting in a circle, we'd actually have an item we may be passing. And
Yes.
It's just a beautiful way to sort of share the space, because when somebody's speaking, they really get to own the space and then pass it on.
Okay,
Which
well,
is so unusual. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I'd like to, so I used to be a public defender, and one of the unexpected things I learned in my work is that no matter that when you're in a system that may be at its core dysfunctional, that you sort of feel like you're in a hamster cage, that you're just a cog in the wheel. No matter how hard you work, the system is going to keep going, and it's basically you're feeding the system, because the harder I worked, the more people were being processed through the system. And so I decided to leave the system and look for other paths through restorative justice towards justice. And that was, so I'm wondering for each one of you, what the unexpected lessons that you have learned in your line of work. Yeah, so I'm going to pass it to Judge Johnson.
Sorry about that, to find the microphone. I started doing this work in the law clinic at Loyola in 1977. And so I have been at this since 1977. And in the 80s, I was the director of the criminal clinic at Loyola. Like you, glorified from that perspective, glorified, but still the same, a public defender is what I was. And I saw all of the cruelty, all of the incredibleness that was a part of the justice system in the 70s and the 80s. I saw it all. But then I also saw some glimmers in terms of hope. I saw judges, a couple of them at least, who looked at different ways of going at dealing with the realities of people who came into the criminal justice system. Those lessons is what I brought to my own judgeship in terms of how now do we deal with realities of the people who come into the system, and how can we change the system such that it becomes a thing that people with problems come into, or people with behavior issues, or people come into, but we operate it such that they never come back. And those words were given to me actually by a judge out of Florida who started the mental health courts and who started the first one in Florida. But how do we do things in the system that will be done such that people who are in it and almost everyone who come in it recognize eventually come out of it. Recognize this. 90% of the people who go into the justice system and is sentenced in the justice system comes back home from it. So the goal of the system should be done such, we should be doing things such that those people will never come back. So if we think in terms of using that as a part of a restorative concept, or how we think about what we do in the criminal justice system, then we're thinking about it to restore people back to the place where they ought to be, where they are no longer in a situation that causes them or us harm. And those people who have been victimized, keep in mind, those people who have been victimized are also a part of this process. And we bring them into the process, and to have them also recognize that doing restorative pieces, doing those kinds of things that make people better that's the best thing for them, and to make them recognize and understand. That is where we ought to be in the justice system. And even at this ripe old age, that is what I'm still trying to do. And I'll pass it to Mayor Broome.
Thank you. I have had many unexpected lessons in my line of work as a public servant over the past 3 decades. I've had the privilege of serving in the legislative branch, and now I'm in the executive branch. So I've served as a policy maker. And I will tell you some of the unexpected lessons I've learned in my work as it relates to restorative justice, which I probably had more experience as a policymaker when I was in the legislature, is that I find it challenging to understand individuals who do not see the need to remove obstructions to redemption and restoration. And so one of the lessons that I've learned in this process is that everyone doesn't think like you do around restorative justice. Everyone doesn't think like you do about the possibilities of second chances for people, for humanity. And but one of the lessons that I've learned is just because everyone is not aligned with a vision for restorative justice or redemption, it means that each of us in our own specific spheres of influence have to keep pressing through towards that conviction that we embrace around restorative justice and people having second chances. And so that's one of the lessons that I've learned. I would say as a leader, it's a lesson of perseverance around your convictions, no matter if they are popular, unpopular, or even not understood or embraced. So sometimes that means you have to do a deep dive of communicating a message, of helping people to understand the value of issues like restorative justice to the greater good of all humanity. And I will now pass it on to Ms. Harris.
Thank you. I would actually like to echo some of those sentiments. For me, something that was unexpected in my area of work, of course, as a student, third-year law student at Southern University Law Center, it's the cultural biases that are written into the law. You think that you look at a system and it's black and white, and it's not. There's so many alternatives, there's so many layers to the code, there's so many different things to be interpreted. And I feel, especially as African descendants and indigenous descendants, we're very oral people, right? Your word is your bond, you communicate differently, and it's not exactly the same. The pressure to have things in writing, the risk of not being able to actually understand what you're agreeing to. And I think those are all things that are rooted in systemic oppression, and they're not necessarily evident. It's not in your face. It's not racism. It's not necessarily stopping someone or preventing someone based on prejudice, but it's so ingrained in the way that the law is written, and different biases that prevent other perspectives from being seen. That's something that was uncovered in my area that I didn't expect to see. And another thing is just your reputation needing to precede you, not being respected as an individual when you go places until someone knows your name or someone knows your title, or being in a circumstance where you have to introduce yourself because you don't look like an attorney, you don't look like a police officer, you don't look like you belong in certain spaces, and always having to respectfully, right? Because you don't want to come off as aggressive or rude, but respectively asserting yourself and making sure that you're able to have a voice. So those are some things that were unexpected in my area. And I'd like to pass it off to Chief Paul.
Thank you. You know, in my position as chief of police, we have a very diverse community here in Baton Rouge. And one of the things that I learned early on in the short time, the almost 4 years that I don't have the same life experiences. And I believe race is very distinctive in our perceptions, our biases, and all of those experiences that determine, who we are. And, one of the truths that was uncovered for me was, we're living in a time where facts don't always matter. That is very challenging in an age where, or in a profession where facts are what we have to go on, particularly when we don't allow facts, where people's opinion can just flow, and you're not able to deal with people like I think we have traditionally had in the past, with the whole influence of social media, where facts don't always matter, or what's trending or following may determine your perspective or view on something. It's an unexpected truth that is something I have to manage as a chief of police, as becoming a new normal. And it's challenging because I can tell you that everyone isn't mentally or spiritually prepared or mature enough to have the courageous conversations about race in America and what we need to do as a community to move forward. Sit on to you, Shailly.
Ms. Harris was talking about sort of the embedded racism in our institutions and our laws. Chief Harris, you mentioned, Chief Murphy, you mentioned I heard the cynicism that some of us have towards people in power, right? Because we don't trust things that we're hearing. So it's almost like it's hard to even figure out what the facts are because let's just say we may be feeling that we shouldn't trust things. You know, like there might be a valid reason for us to be distrustful of information. So we don't know what the facts are sometimes. So these are like huge issues, like, right? Like, but some of us are working within the systems from the inside, systems that have maybe in the public arena not been, have lost a lot of glimmer. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing the man behind the curtain. I don't know. So how would you describe this moment of time from your vantage point? That's sort of what it feels like for me, from where I'm sitting. And I'm wondering what it feels like to you, Judge Jackson. Judge Johnson, I'm sorry. I'm dyslexic, so I mess up names all the time. I apologize.
No need. I look across so many things in terms of systems, and just not the justice system, but recognizing that the justice system itself connects to other systems, especially the health system, as we're seeing right now as regards issues in the health system with what people believe and what they don't. Well, there's connections there. And so when we think in terms of the disbelief in the justice system or the belief in that what the justice system does is arrest people who do bad things and who prosecute them for those bad things and who put them in jail, and which is the essence is warehousing, and that's what historically we've done. That mindset is in us. So now on top of the mindset that is in us, we now have, as the chief just shared, the reality of social media. So on top of the mindset that we have that reality, and we have the reality of what we call traditional media. The traditional media itself presenting a school of thought as regards all of the things that we call bad. But they present a school of thought. Social media presents a school of thought. But historically, the justice system itself presented that thought process that got us to become the most incarcerated place on earth. That happened because of the justice system doing what it did and also driving that kind of message through the people in Louisiana, driving it in terms of, if you want to be a judge, you got to be hard on crime. You got to da da da. If you want to be the DA, if you want to be, this is what you have to be in that role. So all of that is still embedded in us. But on top of it, the chief is right. You also have the influence of social media. You have the influence of regular media. You have all of that that contributes to now, how do we recognize that, for instance, what Governor Edwards did a couple of 3 years ago in terms of the reinvestment piece, in terms of justice, in terms of reducing crimes and sentences, et cetera, how do we continue that momentum? This spring comes another opportunity to continue that kind of momentum around how we think around criminal justice issues and how we go at dealing with criminal justice issues. But it's another opportunity for to do that, but also recognizing that the spring will also be an opportunity for those who absolutely disagree with this to marshal their forces to try and change again the thought process around all of this, including restorative justice. Recognize that there are thoughts in that legislative branch that will say to and out loud to you that restorative justice is just not the way we should go. That is not something that Louisiana justice system should be involved in at all. And so we have to, those of us who believe otherwise, have to marshal ourselves to deal with that reality. And I'll pass it on to Mayor Broome.
Thank you for these very meaningful questions that are being posed. And certainly I've been giving a lot of thought as I've also listened simultaneously to Judge Johnson's response. And so what does it feel like to be in this moment of time and witnessing systems that exist at this moment of time in contrast to other moments of time? So, you know, I have seen over the years the progress that I felt was taking place within certain systems. For example, and this is certainly applicable to restorative justice, but I'm kind of broadening my comments here. You know, I grew up believing that systems would change because people were fighting for systems to change. And then there was a moment in time that I think many of us felt that we saw or were witnessing or getting closer to seeing systems change. For example, systemic racism in institutions, the fight for equity and inclusion. We saw an emergence of more African Americans and people of color in roles of leadership in government. I felt that was all a part of systems changing. You know, we had the privilege and blessing of seeing the first African American president of the United States, you know, a systems change. But then all of a sudden, it was like when we had some breakthroughs and system changes that we reverted to a moment in time that seemed like it was back in another century. You know, it's like we were going backwards in a moment in time after we were witnessing things happening on a timeline. Then all of a sudden it looked like, boom, we went backwards. And so this moment of time for me, I think feels much like it did for my ancestors, for my parents, and for my grandparents. But in a different way, with the advent of media, with the advent of social media, with the advent of technology and the internet and all of these things, I believe are used now and implemented in some very negative ways that once again promotes some of the negativity that has been couched in many of our systems, some of the inequities and injustices that have been couched in many of our systems. And so this moment in time for me, I think feels like it probably felt for my parents and my grandparents who were fighting the good fight of faith for justice and civil rights back in the day. But it just has a different format attached to it, if that makes sense to the listener. So I will tell you, as a woman of color, as an African American woman in leadership, sometimes this moment of time feels very, very troubling for me. And I could probably go on, but it does, because it's very concerning. It's very concerning, and it certainly directs me to think a lot about what can I do in the system that I am in, with the influence that I have, to change and recreate systems of inequity that may exist in my sphere of influence. And I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Harris.
Thank you. So just thinking about restorative justice and what it means to me, I feel like restorative justice, there has to be an intent to not only restore, but to further, right? To push along the agenda. And I also feel like there has to be an intent to restore hope into the community and to let them know that there is alternatives to being punished. So many times when we see individuals, I think I mentioned this earlier, that have committed a crime or have done something wrong in the eyes of the law, it completely shifts the narrative of their existence. They're looked at as being subhuman or as individuals that can't be viable members of society. And I feel like for a lot of individuals, especially nonviolent offenders and things of that nature, there's so many opportunities to grow. And for me, restorative justice looks like caring and having a heart for the community. It looks like going in and actually seeing what the root causes are. Why did you have this reaction? What resources do you need on the front end before, so that you don't even get to the point where you have a record? Did you need food in your home? Did you need clothes? Did you need an after school program? Did you need a training? Did you need an opportunity? For individuals that were in the system and are returning citizens, what can we do for our returning citizens so that they're not being put back in those environments, in those circumstances? Something I remember hearing a long time ago is that for a lot of people, crime is the quickest means of opportunity. So how can we present an opportunity that's an alternative to a crime that allows individuals to get things that they need and to be put back into a circumstance? So I really feel like restorative justice is just an opportunity to, like I mentioned before, restore hope, restore opportunities, and to let individuals know that, yes, you made a mistake. Yes, you made a crime, but it takes a village. And being willing and opening to welcoming individuals back into that village and putting them in a circumstance where they don't have to return back to their past mistakes and who they were before is nothing compared to who they can be in the future. And they have an opportunity to grow. And I'd like to pass it off to Chief Paul.
Yeah, so I agree, we are in some very challenging times. And when you look at the state of where we are, it is concerning to me as well. You know, but there is I'm very optimistic about things. You know, when I look at where law enforcement is today and where we've come and all the changes that have happened over the past a year since the George Floyd incident, and we see these reform efforts all around the country, that we know best practices have already been determined when that 21st century report was put out administrations ago, that for the overall is going to be better for law enforcement. So when I sit down with our young police officers, these new now that are part of our procedure justice training, where we're teaching them fairness in the process, transparency in actions, opportunities to voice impartial in the decision-making process, de-escalation, and all of those things. And we present the facts, right? The facts about how we've policed so long. I can tell you that this next generation of police officers are going to be more prepared than I was, more prepared than my counterparts were to serve the diverse communities. So that is something that I am excited about, that we are now empowering our police officers to use discretion and educating them on the diverse communities we serve, so that they can make decisions that translate into actions that serve the greater good. And sometimes making an arrest in that situation isn't the best outcome. And I'll pass it on to you, Shailly.
Thank you for sharing that vision of a future moment when the police officers may have a healthier relationship with the communities they serve. But I'm wondering, well, in the restorative justice thought process, that is that before we can get to the future, that there needs to be some reckoning of the past and maybe even the present. Like, we have to sit with what's happened, otherwise we're putting bandages on things, and it's a deep rupture in our communities right now, all over the country, not just in Baton Rouge. And you all are leaders, and I'm wondering what that reckoning with the truth looks like. Yeah, like, what does it look like to no longer put bandages on it, pretend like it doesn't exist, to actually look into the abyss of the shadow of our country that we haven't really addressed? We all know the the illumination of our country. You know, we honor the positive aspects of being here, but there's a deep shadow that we haven't really addressed. And I think, and you all are leaders, I'd love to hear what it would look like from your vantage point to do that. Judge Johnson?
One thing is simply to recognize race matters and to bring that conversation to the fore. That's an issue we have here. And the issue comes from how we have used our justice system to impose, and I'm going to use conversations, comments that I've read from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste. But we've used our justice system to enforce the needs of the dominant caste on the subordinate caste. That's what we've done. And so now how do we get out of that? Well, one thing we have to do is admit it. And that's going backwards in terms of all of those wrongful convictions that happened and undo those wrongful convictions. And they happened all over Louisiana. And yes, they happened in New Orleans, and I saw them happen in New Orleans. And now at least we have a DA in New Orleans who is actually going down that path. But it's not just New Orleans that have had that reality. It's Louisiana. And so now how do we bring this conversation into the fore? And I say to you that we have to do it recognizing that we're going to get beaten and battered up doing this. But we have to go to places like the legislature, for one, and reminding them that this is what happened. And so you have to, legislators, help those DAs who want to do some of this. We have to go to the populations we serve and the communities we're in and remind them that the justice system works such that when I say race mattered, it absolutely mattered. And those who were not in a dominant caste got screwed. They got screwed over and over and over again. That's a fact. And the people who are still in that caste, that is white people, must come to the realization, this is what you did. And so we have to bring that message if we're going to do that part of it. But now also, I'm happy, at least in the sense of what I see going on right now, and that we are trying to get there. At least we are in some fashion or form having these conversations. So that's a good thing. But we have to make people face what the reality was of the criminal justice system going back 40 years. And we still have the remnants of that today. And I passed it on to Mayor Broome.
We indeed have those remnants that exist today. And I would concur with the judge when he talked about at least we're having conversations. I believe the rupture that we see not only in the justice system, but in many of our systems that make up the fabric of our nation, of our state, of our communities, is the fact that none of it, the issue around restorative justice, none of this will improve unless there's conviction and intentionality. I love having conversations like this because I think it's part of moving people towards more intentionality to make things happen. For example, now people recognize, because of so many issues that have evolved in our country, whether it's been in the criminal justice system, in the healthcare system, people are awake, they're woke, if you will, around the issues that impact citizens. They're woke around issues surrounding race. And so that means that people now, Black and white, recognize that something needs to be done. When people saw the horrific killing of George Floyd, even those people who at one time said you need to be tough on crime, gave justice a whole different thought, seeing that visual of him being killed. And so it opened up conversations around the country, around the world, about, criminal justice, about police reform, about how Black people are treated differently in many instances. And so it also led to reforms in terms of policies. It led to commissions like we established here in Baton Rouge, the Commission on Racial Equity and Inclusion. It meant that we had different programs and initiatives that took place as a response and as a solution to many of the challenges around race that we saw emerging and continue to see. And so I believe that when we talk about restorative justice, that we know that some people have one viewpoint of justice, and that's punitive. But we have to help people have another viewpoint of restoration and reconciliation. We have to have people see solutions and not just the problems that exist. And so that means that me as a leader and others, we have to do things intentional, like implement ban the box so people can get employment, even though they've been incarcerated. For me, that's part of restoration. That's part of reconciliation. And so it takes intentionality to see these things change for the benefit of humanity. And I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Harris.
Thank you.
Me, Ms. Harris, can I just say one quick hello? Hello, Representative. Thank you for joining us. We're running this roundtable as a circular process. So we created a little seating chart. We're all answering questions. I'm going to let Ms. Harris go, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, Representative. I didn't even see you down there. I would have acknowledged you. What this looks like for me, I would say a greater level of self-sufficiency. I definitely believe in the power of grassroots organizing. Prior to attending law school, I took 3 gap years and I organized in the local community for 2 of those 3 gap years. And it makes a world of a difference when individuals are able to have some sense of autonomy and agency within their community, not having to outsource, not having to go out or seek something outside of where they are. So for me, moving forward as a community and as a nation, I would just like to see a greater level of self-sufficiency and opportunities in local communities. I would like to see a greater level of not only diversity, but inclusion of ideas and cultures that don't necessarily reflect yours. And I feel like when we open that up, it allows for the opportunity of different alternative structures for bringing about justice, because I think that justice is subjective. I feel that when you think about the alternatives to the restorative justice system, or using the restorative justice system as an alternative to traditional punishments, I think that individuals should, not to be a pun, but should be judged by their peers. I think that different cultures bring about different ideologies of what it means to have certain behaviors. And so I just think that moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, a greater level of self-sufficiency, a greater level of inclusion that's not just at the surface level of having Black and brown faces in rooms, but actually allowing those Black and brown individuals to have a say-so in the movement of their culture. And I would like to pass it on to Chief Paul. We were asked, can we please repeat the prompt?
Yes. So I just wanted to catch you up, Representative. We've already had a pretty vibrant conversation where we invoked some elders to think about the space of humility for us in this moment of time, to reflect upon our ancestors and how their wisdom might be guiding us in this moment. Then we sort of dived into some conversations about restorative justice and its potential, and this moment of time, and how there is, it was a very comprehensive conversation, but the cynicism around institutions, the embedded racism within the legal structures, And then the chief shared a vision of having a police force that was well-trained in the future. And now we're sort of talking about what is this moment of time and what we need to learn from it. And I'm not throwing all those questions at you, but if you want to just share a little bit, just to sort of join the conversation, it'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you for weaving me in. And I want to acknowledge my tardiness. I do apologize. There was a time confusion on my end. I thought it was for 3:30, so I will take ownership for that. But I think I can give an answer while also acknowledging the initial piece regarding our ancestors and how I think it connects to the conversation around restorative justice. So just like we want to hear the voices and feel the spirits of our ancestors guiding us, and I believe that they do that every day if we allow it, and if we allow ourselves to receive that, the same principles I believe apply in terms of how we should be thinking about our criminal justice system as it applies to restorative justice. If we see ourselves as an extension of our ancestors, we should see one another in society as an extension of one another. So the punishments that we inflict on one another, we ultimately experience that punishment. So I think there's this belief that if someone commits an act, there should be a level of accountability, which I believe everybody on this panel also agrees with. But we have to measure and take into account how that system of justice or that accounting for an act also has a greater impact on the rest of us as a community. There is an impact that is felt. But if we don't see each other as being connected in that way, then we will continue to commit harm against ourselves. So the idea of restorative justice is not limited just to, and this is a very large concept, but it's when you break it down in terms of how I look at it, it's not just the offender and the victim, or the offender and the victim's family, but it's the offender and the offender's children and the offender's family, and how the punishment that's levied on the offender also impacts them and the negative consequences it has. Or just those citizens who are living in a community who also bear the brunt of decisions that are made by our criminal legal system. We are all part of the same fabric. And I connect that to the earlier discussion that I missed with respect to our ancestors. We have to see each other with a shared connectedness. And I think that's how we can promote true restorative justice and true healing, because just the way that we seek forgiveness, we have to see ourselves being free, not because I want to free someone else through forgiving them, but we want ourselves to be free. And the only way we can free ourselves is if we are willing to forgive. So those are just some initial thoughts I have.
So when you're done, you can just pass it to Chief Paul, yeah?
And I will pass it to Chief Paul.
Thank you, Representative Duplessis. You know, when I think about restorative justice, one of the things I think about it's to repair, right? To right a wrong, right? To make something right, to repair harm that was caused by bad systems or bad behavior. You know, one of the things when we go just beyond what's required by law, you know, simply just doing the right thing sometimes can be the first step. But I think the mayor mentioned it earlier. Look, there has to be a desire, a willingness, and desire from the heart to want to be part. And sometimes when we have people of influence who don't have the life experience, who don't really understand what restorative justice really means. I can tell you that sometimes just an acknowledgement of the truth, you know, we put data and stats out there and we talk about, and I know you do it in the session, how it negatively impact communities of color and disinvested communities. I mean, we can go on and on data, but when we acknowledge data, when we present those facts in formal settings, and we still see that there's not in some circles, a true desire to listen and to want to be part of that change, or it's politicized in some cases, that becomes disheartening. But I can tell you, as the chief of police, my vision as we move forward, and I think when I see, this is my personal view, this lack of desire to try to understand someone who sees something different, or to hear someone else's perspective. I'm reminded back to how I was raised, and I talk about the 3 F's, faith and family first. I had an opportunity yesterday to sit down with about 15 influential pastors in our community, and we talked about that. And I talked about how, we're seeing right now that there are systems, that there are services that are being provided, where when I was young, it was the church, it was the family that taught me conflict resolution. It was my family who taught me how to read. And when I look at all of the socioeconomic issues that the crime and the issues that I'm seeing here, that when we start to put faith and family back into that village, we'll start getting people who understand why it's important to get the other perspective. And I think that's critical in this time that we're in right now, where people don't want to take the time to listen, to learn, and try to understand. And I'll pass it on to you, Shailly.
So what you're describing, what I'm hearing everybody sort of describe is, even when we try to make changes, there are people very invested in maintaining a dichotomy in our culture, because obviously power feeds on it. I mean, and institutions, we had a Brazilian professor and restorative justice practitioner on the last panel, and he was really talking about how the Brazilian government and what he sees, and I wholeheartedly agreed with what he was saying, is that often these beautiful ideas like restorative justice come into the consciousness of a community, and then the power grabs happen, and you take these systems and you use them just to keep the institutions that are dysfunctional alive, instead of actually doing something that's reformative or that's new or that's innovative. You just feed the system with it. Yeah. So I'm wondering how, I've just said 3 things. So how do I believe the restorative justice process could potentially help address the us-them divide if we actually get beyond these belief systems that separate us and sit together. But right now, restorative justice is being maybe used to even continue that division, if it's being co-opted in certain ways. So I wanted to just hear your reflections on that sort of cautionary idea around restorative justice. Judge Johnson.
One of the things that we've seen in New Orleans in terms of this restorative justice path is the fact that it can't survive in the criminal justice system. It needs to be in the community and not be embedded in the criminal justice system, in the DA's office, with all respect to the DA's office, but that's not the place for it. The place for it is in the community. Now, the DA can, as DAs do, but the DAs can determine who goes into it. But how it operates, how it functions, all aspects of that needs to be in the community. And because what happens otherwise is exactly what you just said. The system itself co-opts it. And the system itself consists of the DA, the judge, the jailer. That's the system. Well, I'm sorry, and law enforcement, but that's the system. And so the idea then that we're going to also have it in that does not work. It just doesn't. And at least that's the message I have heard from those people who are really want to put this thing in play, including people who have been involved in restorative justice practices over the course of time, which I have not been involved in, but who have been. That's just not the place for it. Now, having this conversation with the justice system is difficult to have, and we're having a difficult time having it right now in New Orleans. That's just real. But it is the conversation we must have. It belongs in the community, not in the justice system itself. And I'll pass it to Mayor Broome.
Thank you. I'm going to continue with what Judge Johnson said. I agree that restorative justice needs to be part of the fabric of the community, or it will indeed succumb to the power of the systems that are not usually eager to change, eager to reform. You know, many of the systems and the people who run the systems, whether they're judicial or otherwise, find benefit in the way that they are, in the way that they're constructed at the present time. So when you talk about something that restorative justice, it doesn't align with their agenda. So what should happen, I see it as part of the broader picture of our community. When we address the systemic issues of our community, and I'm specifically talking right now about African-American communities, we have to address those issues from a holistic lens. It just, we can't compartmentalize all these different issues. Certainly they all have unique attributes, but at the end of the day, there has to be some synergy around solutions to these issues that we face. And so, for example, we know that restorative justice is connected to, you know, criminal justice and some of the issues that we face in our community. So certainly nurturing it and birthing it, restorative justice from the community, aligns with our whole goal from a holistic approach to addressing the challenges that many of our citizens have in our community, if that makes sense. So, you know, when we talk about issues like restorative justice, I think about some of the I think about, you know, poverty. I think about the lack of economic development. I think of, you know, about disinvested communities. So we have to address it holistically, and part of the fabric of our holistic approach, restorative justice, is couched in there and making it work versus putting it in a system that is not always compatible to the goals that we have in our community. And I am going to pass it on to Ms. Harris.
Thank you. So thinking about some of the opposition that might exist to restorative justice, you have to think about who exactly is the opposition. That's the first question. And I don't really think that there's truly an issue of opposition, because if people's individuals, family members or friends or peers were to be put into those circumstances, they will want them to receive the same grace and favor, right? And so I think it's not even just an issue of the system itself. I think it's an issue of a lack of compassion. No one cares when you're sending someone off to jail that has no impact on you. And that goes back to the sense of community that we have to have involving policing, involving restorative justice, viewing individuals as a peer, as a viable member of society, as you would your neighbor or your close friends. And exactly why are you opposed to an individual having another chance? I just think it goes back to a lack of concern. And, you know, not to politicize it, but just even thinking about COVID and how individuals are impacted by COVID and how selfish people can be. People don't want to get vaccinated, which is fine, but they also don't want to wear masks. They don't want to social distance. They don't want to help and be a viable member of society until they're sick or they're impacted. And I don't think that we correlate oftentimes the mental and emotional impact that physical ailments have to the physical ailments and emotional and physical impacts that jailing someone or putting someone in prison has. What are the psychological impacts of imprisoning someone for something that could have been solved by community service or some other restorative justice measure? What exactly are you doing? You're creating people and you're disenfranchising them from society. And then when they're coming back into society, judging them for not being able to be a viable member of said society without giving them the tools and resources, or creating opportunities where they didn't have to be put in that place in the first place. So I definitely think we should look at why is there opposition and how can we present it at a human front, not a legal front, not an officer platform, but as individuals in a community, how can we best serve and how can we best assist each other on a compassionate basis? And I would like to pass it off to Representative.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. I'd like to build on everything that's been said. Judge Johnson started off by talking about it not being able to exist in the current system that it is, that it has to exist within community, which I agree with. I think it starts there, but it has to be such a groundswell from community such that the system then finds a way to conform with how community sees itself and how we put a value on this idea of restorative justice. So I'm still very much learning about what it truly means. And it's an evolving concept for me personally. When I think about restorative justice, the first thought that I have is a wrong has been committed. And then we whether it be the system, the criminal justice system, or the community, we ask ourselves, what does justice look like? And restorative justice meaning not just justice from the standpoint of accountability so that the victim and the victim's family feel justice, but true justice in terms of healing, so that we are not repeating the same things and that we're not just saying, okay, well, this was an offense, we took care of it, but we are learning from it and we are healing from it so that this didn't happen in vain. So it's much broader than just issues that occur in our criminal legal system. It starts around economics, as Mayor Broome pointed out. It starts around issues like poverty, education, our healthcare systems. And seeing, and this is what Ms. Harris pointed to, going back to that humanity piece, seeing that connectedness of the primarily young Black men in our community who start off as young Black boys, our responsibility as a community to them when we have already failed them in many ways. That when a carjacking occurs or when a shooting occurs, what took place leading up to that, right? What took place leading up to that would put them in that position? I think we can only achieve true restorative justice if we are trying to answer those questions before it happens on the front end and not on the back end. So it's really just, I think, expanding our sense and our definition of how we see one another and how we view and value one another. And because there really is no separation, even though we may want, it's comforting to think that we're not all connected, but the truth is that we are. But we only feel it until we are impacted by something directly, until we're the ones that have been harmed in the system. And then we are now asking for some sense of punishment. But my hope in saying all that, now I'll bring it to a close, is that I'm not ready to accept that it cannot exist within the system, that we have to push for it so that it does exist within the system, so that the system conforms to the desires of a community that sees the humanity in every individual that passes through the system, whether they are on the victim side or whether they are on the defendant side. If we all see one another and see a sense of connectedness in the community, then I believe the system will then conform with, but the system is conforming, is behaving this way because we as a society, we as a community have allowed it to be this way. And I'll pass it on to Chief Paul.
Representative, I'll pass it on to Shailly.
So we're lucky enough to have, we have the executive branch here, we have the legislative branch, we have the judicial branch, we have the chief of police. And I can't speak for Ms. Harris, but I can definitely speak for my children who are young adults that have a tremendous amount of cynicism about all these institutions, 100% cynicism. They cannot even imagine joining any of these institutions as young people. They feel that these institutions are so corrupt to its core. that if they want to affect change in the world, that is not the path they would take. Yeah. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that for, do you still believe in the institutions I know that you're a part of? And what do you want to say to the young people that are grappling with these questions about the fundamental integrity of them? Yeah, I'll pass it to Judge Johnson. You're on mute, sir.
Keep forgetting to do that. I absolutely believe in the justice system. I believe that where we are in it is 180 degrees from where we once were. And that's a fact. Yet it's also a fact that it has still a tremendous distance to travel when the system itself is justice and not like Richard Pryor said, just us. It still has a distance to travel, and that's simply a fact. And we have to still recognize that embedded in the system is a thought process that is just in it. And that's a thought process that speaks to how to, with all respect to it, but how to keep it operable, how to keep aspects of it functioning, how to keep it, with all respect again, y'all, but to keep it as an industry. That thought process is in the justice system and decisions we make and how we look at those decisions that we make. But with that said, I have seen the worst of the worst. I've seen hell at high water. We ain't there no more. And so therefore I absolutely believe in the justice system. And I'll pass it to Mayor Broome.
Sorry, I had a challenge unmuting. To answer your question, I do believe in the institution of local government. I've had the privilege to serve in local government and in state government, and I believe in both of those institutions. But I think part of my responsibility as part of local government now, and it was certainly applicable when I was a state legislator, part of my responsibility is to improve the areas that I believe there are challenges observed in those institutions. So right now, as the CEO, as the mayor president of Baton Rouge and city parish government, part of my responsibility is when I see and recognize and identify these glaring challenges and problems that impede the services and the responses needed to our citizens, I feel like it's incumbent upon me to address those inequities, those situations, those challenges, to improve them. I also think it's part of my responsibility to address the cynicism that exists among some of my young brothers and sisters. And so how do I do that? I include them in the process because this government belongs to them too. So I don't shut them out. I intentionally include them as an elder in government in the process of creating the type of city and parish that they want to see. Because let's face it, I'm going to be here as a leader only for so long. And then I believe, and I firmly believe, that it's incumbent upon us as elders to sow those seeds of leadership and vision in the next generation. And I believe that is what helps minimize the cynicism that exists. I've seen it firsthand as I've included young people in our administration and working with me. You might have seen me turn my head just a few minutes ago because two young people that worked with me came. I have an open door policy. My door was open and they just, hey, Mayor Broome, how you doing? I said, hey, how you doing? But they feel a part that this government is for them as well. And so I think that's what is incumbent upon us to restore belief in the institutions that serve our community. And now I'm going to pass it on to my young, intelligent, bright sister, Ms. Harris, the next generation leader.
Thank you. I can't say that I don't believe in the system, especially as a future attorney, and especially thinking about the fact that they put so many measures in place to intentionally restrict us from voting, intentionally disenfranchise us. If the system didn't work, they wouldn't be trying to stop people from voting. That's the number one thing. And I don't necessarily believe it's a lack of belief in the system. It's more of an exhaustion, right? What exactly can we do? How exactly do we get to have the system utilized for us properly so it can sufficiently work for our needs and our communities? And as a member of the younger generation, as a millennial, we're living in the right now, right? We're living in the digital age, we're in our phones, things of that nature, and we have a lot of resources. And sometimes those resources tend to bring about misinformation, right? Anyone can be a journalist on Twitter. Anyone can be a political activist on social media. And I think that's where some of the distrust is coming from, or the spread of information regarding distrust. But beyond that, you have to look back at our ancestors and our elders and the way that they utilize the system. And to say that the system doesn't work would be disrespectful to the movements that our ancestors and our elders used just for us to be able to do simple things, for us to be able to sit and have fellowship with each other on Zoom, for us to be able to go to certain classrooms, for Southern University Law Center to even exist. We have to look at the way that the system has been implemented. And I definitely don't believe that you can change the building from the outside. Someone has to go in and someone has to implement different things, and you have to make a seat for yourself at the table. And you also have to be able to be willing and intentional about bringing others along with you into that building. And now I'd like to pass it off to Representative.
Brilliant, brilliant perspective. And you have informed my thinking. You know, as I answer that question, I'm going to start by saying that the day that I don't believe in these systems is the day that I need to quit. When I first got to the legislature, one of the first things people would ask you, well, what has impacted you or impressed you the most, or what's your biggest takeaway? And the only thing that I could come up with was this sense of cynicism, that if you brought in any level of optimism that you could actually change something, there was like this ticking clock as to when you were going to buy into a notion of cynicism that you in fact cannot change anything. That was one of the biggest things that I observed when I first got to the legislature, just a great level of cynicism. We have an election tomorrow. There's expected to be 16 to 18% turnout. So that speaks to the level of cynicism that exists. But just like Ms. Harris pointed out, you can't change the system from the outside. You can't change the system overnight. And just like we're combating misinformation with the onset of social media, I think we are also combating an overly romanticized idea of change, that everybody wants to be David taking out Goliath. And when we need to see ourselves more as ants working together to build an ant pile, it's not glorious, you know, it's not glamorous, but if everybody does their shared part, we can carry a very heavy load. But we've been sold this idea somewhere along the way that, you know, we can achieve change overnight. I liken it to like building a cathedral. You know, these things take hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, and you may not see the final product of the work that you put in. Now, there's some immediate change that needs to happen, and there's some things that just shouldn't exist as it stands today, but changing a lot of these policies are rooted in changing mindsets and changing of culture and changing hearts and the ways of thinking. That takes time. And I think going back again to Ms. Harris's point about exhaustion, there's this idea that people believe for some reason that change happens overnight, and it just simply does not. So I'll close with, again, I'm just really, really inspired by Ms. Harris's points. She made me think about one of my personal heroes, AP Turo, who during his time, you know, was the only Black attorney in the South who could take on many of these cases. I think about what he went through. So, you know, for me to be exhausted in this day and age, given all the resources, all the accesses, all the advantages that I have to make change, when he was truly David fighting up against Goliath, to desegregate LSU or to fight for to ensure that Black teachers were paid the same as white teachers, or so many other issues to advance social justice, that makes me more committed. And we have to work to fight against cynicism. It's not that everybody needs to be in public policy or public office, no, but if everybody does their role, we don't have to see ourselves as David trying to take down Goliath, but working together like little ants on the ground, building an ant pile and building a structure. It's a shared responsibility and it's much less heavy now. I keep forgetting to pass it on. Chief, it's back to you.
So the answer is yes. Yes, I believe in the system. And like I am proud to be a police officer for more than 30 years. You know, when it comes to my profession, when I talk to young kids, you know, we acknowledge, when I say young kids, they're really young adults. They're old enough, they're my kids' age, these young officers that are coming through. But one of the things we do is we acknowledge the role that we play in the system, right? And look, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we also acknowledge some of the progress. So yes, I encourage young people in the community who want to serve, come be that change agent, right? That's what we tell them. Come and be that person who can tell us what the next generation wants to see when it comes to law enforcement and how we can change. And I can tell you that that is something that we encourage. We see these young police officers that are in our academies right now. They think a little different, but they're smart. You know, they ask questions. Some of the questions that they ask actually lead to changes in policies, because we work in this ever-changing environment and they see things a little different, and I'm encouraged by that. So yes, I do believe in the system. I love this job, and we're going to continue here in Baton Rouge to promote this as a very good profession and to hold up those values that we want in our young police officers. Because I can tell you, as a father of 5 little Black boys, right? As a father who grew up in the city of New Orleans, who understand what bad policing looks like, who's been the victim of police abuse, who's seen how the systems has negatively impacted African Americans, Black boys. I can also say that I've stood side by side with New Orleans police officers, Louisiana state troopers, Baton Rouge police officers, and other law enforcement officers who uphold those values that we look for in servants. And I'll pass it to you, Shailly.
For the last round, I'm wondering, that was actually inspiring. That filled me with some hope. But I'm asking you all, what grounds you? Is there a quote or a prayer or a lyric that you, like a mantra that you say to yourself in difficult times that gets you through them? And for me, I've sort of, there's a stanza from the Bhagavad Gita that I read a few years ago, which says, the only thing you're entitled to in this life is the work, not the fruits of the work. So that just surrender the results. They're not your business, just do the work. So that sustains me, because sometimes when you get wrapped up, for me, when I get wrapped up in results, I can feel defeated when all I'm supposed to do is the work. So that's something that has sustained me. Judge Johnson, I'd love to hear what sustains you.
I actually, being a part of this restorative justice table sustains me. Having heard all of this, not just today, not just this 2:30 to 4:30 group, but the other groups that I listen to, and that sustains me. Hearing all of what all this day has shared for me has been just food for me. It really has. But when I was judging, I did a number of things in my courtroom, a number of things that was kind of different. I listened to jazz. And people in my courtroom were here playing. I did historical kinds of updates based on where in history we were, especially as it related to Black people. But I also read poetry. I read a lot of Langston Hughes, a lot of his poetry in my courtroom. And one of his poems I really read a lot was I Too Am America. And I read that poem a lot because I would stand in or sit in my room and I would say those words because this is what I believe. I believe it fundamentally that we are America, that we are the group that has made America America. And so in my courtroom, and I would do that. And as I do it now, looking at all of you, I do it. Remember, we are America. We have made America America. And let's continue to do that. And I passed it to Mayor Broome. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to jump ahead without you passing it to me. So I will tell you that what sustains me unashamedly is my faith in God. I am a committed Christian, and it is those values that I embrace that have even motivated me to be a public servant. I see public service as a calling, and I believe that my response to that calling has manifested in me being a public servant for decades and spending most of my life as a public servant. I'll close with two mantras that I embrace. One is a scripture, one of my life scriptures from the Bible, from Philippians 4:6, which says, "Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all that he has done." And my second mantra is something that I've created as a result of me reading scripture and studying the leadership style of Jesus, who had 12 guys that he tried to mentor along the way. And through that mentorship, I understood that it's not your title, it's not your position, but it's your care and your concern for others that is the true measure of your greatness. And I'm going to pass it to Ms. Harris.
Thank you. So I was just so inspired by that. I was going to do one, but after hearing you, I'm going to do two. So I'm a graduate of Bethune-Cookman University, founded by the Dr. Mary Bacot Bethune. And something we had to do as freshmen is come up with gyms. So I know we have some other HBCU alums on the panel. So I don't know if everyone had gyms, but our first year, our freshman year, they made us do gyms. So mine was, yesterday I was clever, so I want to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. And that was my gym in college, just the introspection of realizing that before you can be a light unto others, you have to be a light unto yourself. You have to be intentional about nurturing and pouring into yourself before you're able to go out into the community and serve the community. And I would say my second one is actually a scripture. It's Luke 1:45. It's blessed is she who believes the Lord will fulfill his promises to her. And that's something that definitely sustains me, even in doing this work, just making sure that I know the promises that God put in my heart. And I know that as long as I carry out the work, that he's going to fulfill them for me. So those are my two. And I like to pass it on to Representative.
Thank you. For me, I would have to say my faith, certainly, John 14, let not your heart be troubled. And there's this song by Mahalia Jackson. It's called My God is Real. And that's one of my go-tos. But, I'm also a believer in terms of like just doing work, that being a public servant, that I fundamentally believe that service is the rent you pay for your time here on this earth. And it always brings me to a place of gratitude. And I try to start there when I wake up in the morning, no matter how difficult the day ahead will be. And there are some very difficult days, whether it's professional, whether it's personal. When I can bring myself to a place of gratitude, that always gives me a clearer sense of focus and purpose. And it centers me. So I always try to go back to gratitude as my starting point when things get challenging. and I will pass it to the chief.
Talked about the foundation. I think I shared early about the influence my mom had on my life. And she would tell me, I remember when I was young, and I share this with my kids, there was a poem, and I don't remember who the author is, but it went something like, "Hey, Black child, do you know who you are? You can be who you want to be if you try to be what you can be. Do you know where you're going wrong?" And I can go on and on and on. And I can tell you, as a grown man with 30 plus years of experience, I still go back to that point. You know, when I'm doubting myself, when I'm talking to the mayor, when she's asking me what we're going to do about this crime rate, when sometimes the results that we desire from our strategies, and I got to look in the mirror and think about what my mom taught me. And I share that with my kids. And the reason why I say that is because I believe that we have so many young Black kids in our community that don't understand that don't get that, because here in Baton Rouge, when it comes to homicides, 90% of my victims are Black males. And the suspects that we believe have committed those crimes and the ones we're arresting are Black males. And I think that if they understood that point, if they learned that point when they was a baby, just like I was, maybe just perhaps we wouldn't have some of the things that we're going through today. And I really think that, you know, when I see and I talk to these young kids, they lack hope. They don't have a foundation of faith. And so, you know, what guides me and on the prayer calls that my mayor have every Wednesday, that I appreciate the uplift that we have every Wednesday. And then I go and I share that. So it's kind of like every Wednesday when the mayor has her prayer calls, I'm re-energized. And sometimes I think she steps on my toes, because I have to be honest, y'all, sometimes I thought about giving up as a chief. If you look around the country, we like to blame crime on who, y'all? On police departments, on police officers. That's why chiefs of police are retiring every day and they're getting fired every week, because when there's crime, we like to blame our law enforcement leaders. But the reality is crime is a social economic issue and it's a community issue. So I thank my mayor, and I think those words that my mom gave me when I was a little bitty baby boy, that keeps me grounded and keeps me moving and sharing it with the young kids in this community. And I'll let you have it from there, Shailly.
It's been an honor to sit in circle with you all. Thank you for honoring me by sitting here today. If you have time, if any of the people listening have questions, Angel can ask the questions to whoever can stay for that. Yeah. If you have any questions, if you can put it in the Q&A area, or if you have questions for each other. People have been saying things in chat, but I don't think they have any direct questions. Professor Goodley, would you like to come on here and just speak for a minute? Can I?
While Professor Goodley is coming, I'm going to say to Representative Duplessis, maybe we can talk about restorative justice in the community. And maybe I can have with Representative Duplessis some other folk who can help the two of us truly understand what restorative justice means. And like him, no, I'm new to the concept of restorative justice, absolutely. But hopefully we'll have that conversation.
Absolutely, I welcome it, and I think we have to.
I think the conversation we had before you joined was really about how we were thinking that restorative justice vested in the community would be the most powerful way to go forward. Professor
Attorney Agnihotri, I see a couple of questions.
Oh, fabulous. Angela is going to be moderating those for us.
So the first question, do police departments require that new officers learn the history of policing?
So yes, part of our curriculum is the introduction in history. That's a post standard. We teach it a little different here. We're starting to see other police departments come online. We have what's called every police officer has to go through. And in that, we talk about the history of policing, specifically the history of policing in the city of Baton Rouge. We share data, which shows how we've policed disinvested communities. And we have conversations, and they are uncomfortable. We share the history of policing, particularly how we dealt with African Americans. So we have those conversations, and then we begin to get into those core issues of the training of fairness, transparency, voice, and impartiality. So that is mandatory in all the police academies of Baton Rouge Police and in our in-service training as well.
And if I may add to that, you may know, but the audience does not, but Southern University Law Center has also partnered with the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project and has been offering a training that is historically based. It was basically, the cases of racially motivated homicides that were investigated from 1930 to 55, right? The Jim Crow period. And what we did was we took the cases that involved police officers, which turned out to be plentiful. And we turned that into a training about intergenerational trauma. And so police officers can relate to intergenerational trauma by relating to direct trauma and the trauma that they face on the job, so that they can understand that the community cannot heal because we have yet to reckon with the trauma that they have faced in those communities, and especially the violence that they faced in those communities. And so we've done the training with the Baker Police Department, also with Southern University's campus police. We've introduced cases that are unique to those jurisdictions, because it's really important that if you're policing a community or if you're endeavoring to do reforms with a community, you should know what that community has been through. You should know who is in that community and what that history is. Because just because you're new to the job, that uniform is not new to the community. And that uniform has done a lot of damage. And so a lot of times it takes a great deal of humility in order to get to humanity. And so that's a lot of what the training that we have offers at the Southern University Law Center. And we definitely hope to be expanding that training and partnering with some of the folks on this call even before we start tailoring the training to prosecutors' offices, which we'll be doing starting next year.
All right, another question, and I'll just open this up to everybody. Do we think crime is mainly a social problem, or do we think it's split between social and racial motivations?
I can go first with that, just to share what the chief said. We in fact think police and the lack of it, effective policing, contributes to crime. That's absolutely not the case. Crime is a social issue, and society must get at the fact that that's where it is, and it's incumbent upon societal systems, not the justice system, but societal systems, to do things proactively to get at those things that result in criminal behavior. But that's society. That's not policing, and so that's the thing that we must do with societal systems.
Thank you. Do others want to weigh in, or I can move on to the next question? All right. When challenged by those who do not believe the same as you do, or the same grounded values you live by, what have you said? What can you offer by way of advice for others?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Can you just restate it?
Yeah, I will try and interpret what I think they mean. So just essentially, I guess, when challenged by those who do not believe the same. So folks are coming from a lens where they don't share the same values you do. Okay. And I guess that's in like discourse, legislation, policing. What can you offer by way of advice to other folks that may encounter that same tension?
I'll take a shot at that one. We've often heard the phrase lead by example. So that question speaks to offering advice to others who may encounter disagreements in terms of perspectives, but I think it starts in terms of how we conduct ourselves when we have disagreements. And it was stated earlier that we can't achieve humanity until we exercise a degree of humility. And that is profound, because I think what is truly lacking in our discourse today, in political discourse for sure, but political discourse is often attached to your philosophical views on various issues. There's a lack of humility. And this humility and unwillingness to be willing to be wrong. Maybe you don't know it all. You know, if there's a hot issue being debated in society, everybody's an expert, and everyone's ego is so attached to their viewpoint that they cannot be proven wrong. If we truly care about solving these challenges, if we could detach ourselves a little bit from issues that we should all care about, but give ourselves the room and the space to be wrong, then I think we could make progress. And I think when I'm confronted, I certainly try, and I'm not perfect at this. I'm trying to be better at it myself. So this is a collective effort, but I try to give people the space and the room to convince me as to why I might be looking at something the wrong way. Now, I'm going to stand up for my convictions, and it's going to be a spirited debate, but I shouldn't view you as less of a person. You shouldn't view me as less of a person just because we disagree on something. And I think we have to give ourselves a little bit more humility in terms of finding solutions.
Thank you. So Erica writes, I've worked with an organization that has referrals from police officers pre-ticket to a community-based restorative justice program for youth. Are you all aware of more initiatives like this? The organization she worked with is lcjp.org. Does that ring a bell for anybody?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, and Erica, if you want to like reframe that a little bit so we can understand better. But what has been written is I've worked with an organization that has referrals from police officers pre-ticket to a community-based restorative justice program for youth. Are you all aware of more initiatives like this?
So I can speak to one initiative that I'm familiar with. It's called LEAD, and that's Law Enforcement Assistant Diversion Program. It's not targeted to juveniles, which is unfortunate. And we've noticed that there were some disparities with who they were helping, but essentially it's diversion at that first point of contact to prevent people who are routinely going in and out of jail, usually because of substance abuse or mental health issues, to prevent that from happening any further and to instead reroute them to social services that will attend to those needs that are really the cause for their incarceration or their detention.
All right, another question. Judge Johnson mentioned that the justice system functions as an industry. Given the inspiring conversation about the possibility of our systems to change, how can the industry of the justice system be dismantled or dealt with?
Since I said it, I guess I'll start. But the dismantling of it began actually with Governor Edwards' administration and the legislators' participation in terms of the Reinvestment Act, in terms of changing sentences as regards crime, in terms of multiple bill, and all of those kinds of pieces that added to the number of people coming into the criminal justice system or coming into our prison system and reducing that number. And so in that sense, that process has started. Now the question comes, however, can we do more of that, recognizing though that there are industry in Louisiana, especially with sheriffs, who have used their jails and built larger ones to take advantage of the fact that courts sent so many people into the justice system and the prison system couldn't hold them all. So in that sense, they have used that in essence as an industry. That's a fact. But we see changes in that now coming, and we need to see more. And we have to protect that with all respect to it, but we have to protect those pieces that we now have with all respect, but to the legislature in the spring when they act. We have to protect that.
I'll just briefly add to that. I think Judge Johnson is absolutely right. It has become an industry. Historically, it's been shown, it's been documented how that came about, particularly in Louisiana, but there are other similar examples throughout the country. They're relied upon for jobs and communities. But then it's not just eliminating that way of functioning, but also developing new industries and new opportunities for people to grow communities and to be less reliant on that system. So I just wanted to add that because it is essentially been turned into an industry that's been relied on for economic purposes.
All right, and Chantel, I don't want to exclude you, even though you put in the chat, so I'll just go ahead and answer this one too. Another panelist earlier in the day mentioned how difficult it is to gain access to data regarding police departments, and particularly individual officers' disciplinary records. She was discussing how this lack of transparency creates and perpetuates the mistrust between the police and the community. For the chief, and then of course others, any thoughts on this?
No, I support the transparency. You know, we release our numbers. We have regular meetings with the community. We have a chief advisory council here that I meet with quarterly, where not only do we go over stats on as it relates to internal affairs investigations, use of force incidents. We put that out our annual report, but we also engage in conversations as it relates to policies to make sure that they meet community expectations. So there's a lot of data that we've been giving out. Now we haven't always shared all that data, but we do really actually in the process of redoing our website, where you're going to see even more data being pushed out to the public to make sure that we're doing our part as it relates to transparency.
It's not just the police department that had police departments that have data issues in terms of what they share and how deep they go down in the information of the things that occur in that system. But it's also in district attorney's office. District attorneys are absolutely not interested, truly interested in sharing lots of their data and showing you or telling you specifically what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and where they do it. Remembering that a prosecutor says who, what, when, where, and how to prosecute. So the data that they provide should reflect who, what, when, where, and how. And they have a very difficult time presenting that kind of information. And so yes, we need to get more from police, but we need to get more from district attorneys also.
And if I may, Angel, just as not a moment to publicize what we're doing, but we do believe in data at the Law Center. And I think the Chancellor agrees that we need to be doing our part to give to the public the information that we learn in the Law Center, and especially with the data that we review. And so as a pilot for next semester, beginning in the spring, we will have students who are engaging in racial and ethnic impact studies for bills that affect the criminal justice system. And in order to do that, we need to be collecting data. And so we'll be starting a data center under the Institute for Civil Rights and Justice, because one thing that I learned in New Orleans was that just because you have a piece of data doesn't mean that it's verifiable. It doesn't mean that it's good. And a lot of times the non-concurrence of data prevents you from developing strategies that will really affect the issue at hand. So we will be moving on that and making a commitment to being as transparent about what's coming down the pipeline, especially for our lawmakers.
All right, wonderful. With that, I'm just going to let us go because we need to take this 10 minutes to transition for our movement piece at 4:30 Central. And after that, we'll have our circles and this has been such a fruitful discussion. Thank you all for joining us for this extended period of time. And yeah.
I just want to say something really quick. So the way that the day was set up is this same Zoom link will continue as Malika leads us through movement, which we probably all need after this day, for half an hour. But when we sit in circles, we're giving everybody an opportunity to experience a community circle so that you can have a conversation with strangers about important issues of the day in a facilitated manner. We have circle keepers in different breakout rooms, but there was a separate link for that meeting format. So if you don't have that link, please email me at circles@therestorativecenter.org. I can send you that link. So that is the remainder of the day. Is there anything else logistically, Angel? So we're going to be right here. Malika is going to join us in 10 minutes and lead us 8 minutes and lead us through movements for half an hour. And then we're going to switch over to the circle spaces and breakout sessions of 10 to 15 people each in circles with 2 circle keepers, having a conversation that you might find illuminating about sitting in a circle process in a community-based model. Thank you. I learned so much today. It was amazing.
This was an amazing panel. All the panels have been amazing. Thank you so much.
I learned so much. Thank you, guys. And please let me know if you'd like to join us for the